Just a little logistics about the dinner, whom are going tonight. We will have a bus leave from the Agora Hotel. There is a short, sort of like an overview of the exhibition there. So that will be from 7 to 8, and then at 8 we will start the dinner. And the bus will leave from the Agora Hotels around 6:45. So we have a vehicle arranged for that dinner. And for this event, we have a distinct panel of speakers from the Rangeland Scholarship and Global Standards, and I'm very thrilled to introduce them. We have Una Jones, founder of the Sustainable Fiber Alliance. She has dedicated her efforts to combating environmental damage in Mongolia and improving herders' livelihood, and she focuses on enhancing the impact of cashmere production. We also have Dr. Dave McElroy. He has a PhD in human impact ecology, specializes in sustainability standards, multi-stakeholder initiative, and at Sustainable Fiber Alliance, he works on making their standard systems efficient and impactful. And Dave will also be moderating this session. We also have Derek Becker, who's an advisory group member for the Stellar Project. He has extensive experience in transforming food and fiber systems globally, and he now explores rangeland restoration models. We also have Paul Litterfair, who heads the RSPCA International, works on animal welfare standards and CSR policies, and he has collaborated with Sustainable Fiber Alliance on practice course for Mongolia and China on Kashmir. And last but not least, we have Ian Whiteford. He worked with SFA on establishing a sustainable cashmere supply chain, and he continues his interest in textile sustainability and upcycling the cashmere waste. So please join me in welcoming Una, Dave, Derek, Paul, and Ian. Bring our applause to them.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, great introduction. So my name's Dave McElroy. I'm the head of standards at the SFA. When Vivian down the front here, who's the person really responsible for putting this panel together, so full credit goes to her, really. When she came to me and said, we're going to have an expert panel where we're going to ask people, intelligent, smart people, these difficult questions about the challenges facing rangelands and what their solutions. I said, Vivian, let me stop you there. I'm happy to do it. But no, apparently I'm just moderating, asking the questions of the smart people. Moderating is what I'll be doing. So just to give you a bit of information about the session that we have here. First, we're going to hear a little bit from Louise Baker at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, so about land turning into desert, not tiramisu, unfortunately. We'll hear a little video from her that you may have seen last year, but it provides a bit of context as to why rangelands are important, and we thought it would be useful to show it again. We'll then hear a short presentation from Una. She assures me it's 10 minutes precisely, and Derek after that, who assures me it'll be 13 minutes precisely, and I've threatened to start silent dancing until they stop if they don't stick to those times. So please, guys, save me from that. Don't make me do that. We'll then have a bit more open discussion where we'll hear a bit from Paul and Ian, and also a bit more from Una and Derek, where we talk a little bit about some of these big questions and hopefully come up with some interesting points. If you guys have a burning comment or a burning question, if you want to come in and offer some wisdom when the panel is answering questions, don't hesitate to put your hands up, because it'd be great to hear from you as well. And just to keep you on your toes, I might just even randomly pick one of you to give me your thoughts at some point, so make sure you're paying attention the whole way through. But enough of that, enough of me blathering on. First, we've got our video from Louise Baker. So yeah, I understand that we'll be able to bring that up and get that going.
Hello everybody. The vast and diverse grasslands and open rangelands of the world are the wild, untamed frontiers of our planet. Picture this. You're standing on the edge of a sprawling grassland, the wind ruffling your hair, the sky a deep blue, A huge herd of healthy livestock is roaming and grazing nearby. This is an enchanting world, a place where pastoralists, herders and ranchers are self-reliant in almost every way, except that they rely on the land's bounty for their livelihoods. This is not just a place where these communities work, it's their entire way of life. Rangelands aren't just landscape, they're an integral part of our cultural identity. But grasslands and rangelands rarely get the recognition they deserve on the global stage. Rangelands, covering over half of our planet's surface, provide economic benefits, environmental services, and immense cultural riches that are, more often than not, taken for granted. The data that expresses the true value of grasslands and rangelands just isn't out there, because we have in our hands a natural and highly valuable treasure chest, but we seem to have misplaced the key. As a result, that picture of that enchanting world that you had in your mind is no rural idyll. The grasslands and rangelands are increasingly under siege, compounded by climate change, overgrazing, land use change, invasive species, wildfires, and drought mean land degradation and desertification are gathering pace. In the worst affected areas, sand and dust storms make life unlivable. We know approximately 20% of the total rangelands in the world are degraded, making life on the range very, very tough. The United Nations has declared 2026 the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. To play our part, the UNCCD is delighted to be working with you all to help conserve, sustainably manage, and restore the land. We call that land degradation neutrality. And we are delighted to be partnering with the Rangeland Stewardship Council and others, because by managing the grasslands and rangelands well, we could unlock the real potential of the world's great grassland and rangeland ecosystems. And in that, private stakeholders in particular have a vital role to play. Working together with herders and pastoralists, Indigenous communities, and experts on sustainability, you can ensure the long-term environmental health and economic viability of the rangelands. So in that sense, the development of the global rangeland standards is truly an exciting development. It will minimize the risk of soil and pasture degradation and over time reverse it. It will keep livestock healthy and protect wildlife. It will build the resilience to the impacts of climate change and effectively benefit production, improving quality and boosting livelihoods. That enchanting image in our mind can only become a reality if we make it happen together. Thank you.
Great. So without any more ado, we'll bring up Una to give a presentation now. So Una's the CEO and founder of the SFA and also a founding member of the RSC. So it's been around from the start, and she's going to give us a little bit of context about where we're at, where we're going, and what's been done so far. So please, Una.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It's really great to see so many of you here today, and we've been, in setting up the Natural Fibre Connect, it was really important for us, Kashmir, in terms of size and scale. We represent about 0.2% of the natural fibre, the global fibre dynamics, if you like. So we don't even represent on the map. So it was really important for us clubbing together with other natural wool fibres and discussing challenges, issues, and ways of addressing these challenges and issues. Finding solutions was really important for us. So we've been partnering together with the Alpaca Association, International Alpaca Association, Mohair South Africa, SFA, and Wool Connect and Schneider. So all of us, for us, the land and its bounty and how we can manage and bring in solution is vital. So within today's discussion, I will be talking about the Rangeland Stewardship Council. And overall, rangelands cover, Louise said, half of the world land, and it's really crucial in maintaining ecological balance, and because it supports 3 billion people's livelihood globally. And today, herders and farmers face unprecedented climate risk which threaten their livelihoods and way of life. At SFA, we have been a strong advocate for rangeland stewardship and building resilience on Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. We incorporate traditional as well as scientific knowledge and best practices to promote resilience and across rangeland communities. So we've been working and supporting rangeland communities in Kashmir-producing countries, Mongolia, China and Afghanistan, supporting over 160,000 herders, bringing significant value, stability and transparency to the sector. So just to give you a bit of a background, if you like, the Mongolian herders' income, 80-90% comes from Kashmir, which is, in terms of a value, it's very small, but it means a lot for our communities. Mongolia have 3.5 million people, and 1/3 of this people is directly benefiting herder communities, and herders benefit their income source. And it's really vital, as much as their income coming from that, Mongolian gross domestic product, agricultural product and sources only represent 12% of the GDP. However, it represents 80% of the Mongolia's agricultural output. So we really need to understand the GDPs or LCAs or product environmental footprint doesn't really represent full value of the rangeland and ecosystem that provide for culturally, biodiversity, all of which isn't capturing real value of it. So for us to be working together with others, finding ways of bringing better solutions and bringing better value for herder communities, for rangeland ecosystem services value, truly is going to be really important. For the real contribution of livestock sector shouldn't be really solely seen in terms of this kind of different, gross value or, PEF. Overarching value of rangeland provides food security, income source for entire nation, for Kashmir and the rangeland sector in itself. So it improves our food, soil, protects our areas of rangeland, coexisting with native life, also acts as a reservoir of cultural heritage and traditional ecological knowledge, and it supports well-being of rural households. So given that 70% of the global landscape is covered with rangeland, livestock production is set to remain the backbone of rural livelihoods globally. So at SFA, we have a shared mission in reducing environmental impact, securing better livelihood for herder and farmer communities, and ensuring high animal welfare. So within this work, I'll just give you a quick introduction of what Rangeland Stewardship Council is, and I'll give you a short video of why it's important for us as an SFA working and collaborating with wider diverse partners in bringing better next generations of standards and systems to support the development across rangeland. So Rangeland Stewardship Council is supported by United Nations of a convention to combat desertification, and we are at SFA, we're working with ILRI, which is International Livestock Research Institute, and supported by Jeff-funded Stella Project, which has dozens of partners that our Derek will talk a bit later on, and we are working together and collaborating in bringing better value for rangeland communities. So I'll give you a little bit of short video here about...
The SFA is a non-profit, standard-holding and membership organisation that represents a global alliance of supply chain actors, stakeholders and industry experts with a mission to drive positive change in natural fibre value chains. Our vision is for a responsible and inclusive global natural fibre sector that balances and safeguards the health and well-being of people, animals and the environment in rangelands. Our work first started by supporting Kashmir herders in Mongolia, working with the end-to-end supply chain. We now work with over 160,000 herders across Mongolia and China, connecting them to traders, processors, spinners, suppliers, manufacturers, and brands and retailers in the global fashion industry, ensuring all adhere to the SFA chain of custody. Focused on the herder level, the SFA Cashmere Standard outlines 5 global principles for responsible cashmere production. These are effective management, decent work, biodiversity and land use, animal welfare, and fibre quality improvement. We are only able to make these positive impacts from funding solely received through the private sector. This 100% private sector funding is invaluable to supporting Indigenous communities and the rangelands. Through this commitment, the SFA is working together with like-minded organisations who are dedicated to improving the rangelands and reversing the effects of desertification as part of the Rangelands Stewardship Council, or RSC initiative. The RSC's mission is the establishment of a global benchmark for responsible rangeland management through the creation of a unified rangeland standard. The initiative's approach combines the importance of collaboration, regional specificity, One Health, a bottom-up strategy, and transparency. As part of the Rangelands Stewardship Council, we'll be ensuring the livelihoods of herders and pastoralists globally by diversifying into other value chains such as dairy, leather and hides, and meat products, building on what we have learnt in the cashmere sector. From this, we will be working with multi-stakeholders to support the world's rangelands by ensuring compliance with laws, establishing a framework for Indigenous people and local communities, promoting effective management practices, upholding decent work standards, and encouraging the adoption of sustainable rangeland stewardship practices. If you would like to learn more about the Rangeland Stewardship Council and our work, then please visit rangelandstewardship.org for more information. Thank you.
So here you can see a bit of an introduction of who we are and what we are planning to do. So really, Rangeland Stewardship Council approach will be a more collaborative approach, looking forward, and we're looking to work with local, national, global institutions to implement effective landscape and jurisdiction-based approach in rangeland management and practices. We've heard from Gunter how important the kind of value from ecosystem services across rangelands, or the wider kind of sources of commodities, and so sources is important. So it's really kind of what we embody here is that collaboration, network and working together. Rangeland is really diverse, so it's really important for us in bringing local ownership and making sure that regionally specific approach that supporting One Health, which is the human health, environmental health and animal health, which is all interlinked. That's supporting our approach going forward, and also we need to make sure that transparent and good governance to support the standard and its implementation will be vital going forward. So the rangelands are, well-managed rangelands will have a healthy soil, have a water nutrient availability for the plants, and healthy livestock means that lower risk of passing diseases to people, to animals and wildlife. So overall, this means better quality fibre, better quality meat, better quality dairy, and better human health, and better income, and ultimately better quality of life. So it's all interlinked and interdependent each other. Over the last 30 years or so, we have many of the global institutions, development agencies have worked in a very reductionist approach into kind of looking things in, this is just an economic issue, this is a social issue, this is a woman's issue, and this is, just the rangeland stuff, and this is just for animal welfare. So it's no exception. SFA started working with cashmere. Cashmere was out of all commodities, one of the most value-adding commodity. We've started in that. So we're in that category also, the kind of working in the reductionist way. However, it was always in our heart in making sure that we support our communities in the more overarching way going forward. That's why our standards in rangeland stewardship was always really at the heart of what we did. And When we started with SFA, we knew that, for example, our herder communities across Mongolian rangelands, they have goat and sheep in the same pen. We have camels, we have yaks, we have horses, and then if you look into the left, there's a yak there is a camel. Often, like desert environments, will have a camel. There's other horses, so kind of auditors. It's quite easy. You go and look left, right, and centre. All of the herders, the livestock is there. So it's really important for us to working rangeland communities, bringing value for their products that they produce, whether that's fibre, leather, meat, milk, because it comes from the same animal, and we shouldn't have this standard is just for a fibre. Do we have to bring another standard to provide for their meat and milk? So it's really important for us taking overarching view and bringing better certification and better support for communities, as well as kind of livestock products and communities. There are many, plant pharmaceuticals, cosmeceuticals, various different crops come from rangeland regions. So all of those kind of rangeland that comes from the same region. Why wouldn't you be able to certify this? Because herders and communities all working together make sure that overarching landscape jurisdiction basis that's been supported and planned and managed effectively. So it's really important how we can bring standard to support herders and communities through standards and its implementation, involving people and co-creating with the landscape jurisdiction within as its core. Okay. So we started working with our partners in developing this standard, and we've brought several consultations. At the core of the standards is going to be rangeland stewardship. However, it's really important that each country have strong legal compliance against land use, land rights, land tenure, and supporting Indigenous people and communities in that region. Also making sure that decent work followed all across the supply chain is really important, and how do we bring this farmers, Indigenous people all across the world in diversified regions, bringing those effective management is going to be really key. So all of which is very familiar as a standard setting organisation. We're looking forward working with others in bringing better collaborative standard. In year 2026 is going to be an important year for Indigenous communities, pastoralists. UN General Assembly announced that it's going to be International Year for Rangelands and Pastoralists. So we're looking forward in bringing credible product certification, working alongside with wider communities that's working in diverse regions in that opportunity together. And also it's going to be the COP in Mongolia for UNCCD. So we have a really opportunistic ways of really embracing this milestone to work towards and bring better work and program effectively. At natural fibre sector, for example, many of the kind of rangeland communities, what they produce, the fibre that goes out, fibre and the leather probably goes and travels into global north-south, without perishing. A lot of meat, milk, it supports local economies and food security. However, I believe that certifying the meat, leather and other products could create better offtake opportunity and reduce overgrazing and increase income security for herder communities. And that furthermore, the benefit for animal health welfare, by involving this meat, leather market in a certification scheme, we would gain the leverage needed to enhance the welfare conditions throughout the animal's life cycle, from birth to slaughter, birth, transport and slaughter, and bringing in those sectors and working together will have a far better value for animal health welfare. So I just wanted to give you an overarching really development of that is global rangeland standard at the core of it. However, it supported animal welfare species level standard and commodity standard. However, globally, there are many different animal health welfare standards out there. There are different commodity standards. We were looking to bring mutual agreements across those standards and bringing better local ownership that suits in that environment, that works in that environment, to work together and bringing this standard together. So really, at the heart of crucial task of RSC is establishing a robust, transparent monitoring and reporting mechanism. There's a need to promote a collaborative scientific research, capacity building, education and communication in animal welfare and a nexus of environment, biodiversity, of animal welfare and in social areas as well. So we think that the research that supports the herder communities as the monitoring, evaluation, learning framework will also could support the development of the LCA and the PEF framework, possibly kind of, so the policymakers make a right decision and suitable decisions to supporting these people. And I believe that if in absence of kind of a robust database and system to support this really important decision that a European Union bringing out as a tool for companies to make in carbon, it hugely disadvantaged our the natural fibre communities. And if the companies gets this data, they will start cutting down the natural fibres because they are far far higher carbon impact as a result. And we think that it's important for us to be able to bring that network information appropriately to support to support our communities and support the policymakers in making right decision. I believe that in absence of, this is the best, the poor kind of data source that we can build, so the decision makers make a bad decision. So I believe that we shouldn't have any, poor data to make a bad decision that disadvantage is the indigenous herders and community, because it represents huge part of our culture to continue. And if our herder communities doesn't have a livelihood that comes from this fibre going forward, it brings their extinction very quickly. And we are facing this kind of challenges of existence of communities portal open that you can access into this portal, register, you'll be able to contribute into the standards, and you can become a member. Within those communities channel there are various different platforms where you will be able to engage, contact us. So essentially one of the key kind of milestones we really wanted to bring was the Land Day on the COP. We're working with 3 presidential governments that organized UNCCD COP in the past. Cote d'Ivoire, Saudi Arabia, and is coming together into bringing the presidency event in protecting and restoring a rangeland and promoting importance of global rangeland standard. And so we would be working with IUCN and MILRI with our stellar partners in bringing a presentation in there. So if you would like to work with us and bring in the really key issues that we should propose and bring forward, and what's going to be our ask for cross-rangeland communities, come and reach us, and we'll be really happy working together and bringing better stakeholder collaboration to present at the COP. And yeah, so one of the things that I really like to kind of mention is cross-rangeland camel plays a really key role. And in Mongolia, we've got Bactrian camel. I know Australia have got camel. And Africa, you've got dromedaries. And South America, you've got alpaca, guanaco, and vicunas. So we wanted to ensure that, how we can bring this standard together, and we're launching this standard this December. We've been carrying out the consultation. Come and engage with us, and we're really happy to support you, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Una. I mean, lots of very interesting stuff to cover there on the themes that I think a lot of people have covered at the conference. Next, we'll hear from Derek Baker, who is of no relation to the Louise Baker we heard, right? Not that we're aware. Derek has had quite a long career, starting as a farmer back in the day, making his way across, 40 countries or something? Is that right? That many different countries? Yeah, going into academia, out of academia, and I think he was showing me this presentation earlier today, and I think it's really important context for us all to understand a little bit more about where this fibre that comes from, because it's quite often quite easy to forget that it comes ultimately from a goat, not on a spool or in a bolt of cloth or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Derek. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I'm not sure what it means to have had a long career. I have to think about that one. Yeah, as Dave's, it's become customary at this meeting to give an introduction. I'm a New Zealander, and more on that later. I did first degree in animal science and pasture management systems, and ran a family farm for a few years, and then went back to university and did a PhD in mathematics and systems, as one does, and I've worked most of my life in the food and fibre value chains, I guess, across a number of continents, and plenty of stories to be told about that in a different setting. Are there any other New Zealanders here today? Yeah. There is this responsibility. There's not many of us, you see, and there is this responsibility that we bear amongst the Anglophone countries, and I pay due respect to those that have to communicate in a foreign language here today, but you're listening to English that is completely uncontaminated by an accent. And New Zealanders bear that responsibility everywhere they go, and I know my Australian colleagues will back me up on that and help me with that. So I'm here to introduce a project known as STELLAR. It has an awkward acronym, and it's about large-scale rangeland restoration. And we have a number of partner organisations in here. For those of you that are not used to all these acronyms, I've written them out for you, and some of that spelling was a bit challenging. Plenty's been said about the rangelands. All those different colours represent different kinds of rangelands, and degradation is an enormous problem. Plenty's been said about the functions of those rangelands. Just as a bit of a reminder for all of us that are involved in livestock value chains, every calf that's born into the beef industry comes from the rangelands. Every lamb that comes into the meat or the wool industry is born on the rangelands. It's more than, it's both more than and less than biodiversity. These are tremendously productive resources, and countries that take on tasks in the livestock industries like producing sheep and producing cattle without a rangelands face an uphill battle. So it's the basis of a lot of what we hold dear, including textile fibres. So the project has this objective that won't be in the exam. I'll just sort of deconstruct that for you a little bit. And the main thing there is it's wanting to reverse rangeland degradation. So as Louise Baker was saying, we're in a lot of trouble with our rangelands. A lot of them are degraded, and this project wants to get on the front foot and start winding that back. So here's a bit of context here. I think everyone's familiar with livestock value chain development projects, both in developing countries and in advanced economies. And they have a lot going for them, a lot's been achieved, but there's a few things that can be said about them. Generally speaking, they address products and value addition. They don't necessarily address resources. They tend to work on rangelands in the sense of maintaining them, of not doing any harm, of protecting rangelands. What this project's going to do is go out, where the harm's already been done, and try and unwind a bit of that. Mostly livestock value chain development programs have been at a small, factoring in these rangeland effects on carbon. What do those equations start to look like there? Many people are concerned about the impetus, the momentum we're getting towards trade barriers around sustainability. And of course, we've got this masthead that we can all use of the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists in 2026. There's some context around where this STELLAR project is going. So I wanted to say a few things about livestock value chains, and there's many in the audience that know more on the subject than I do. I wanted to just make sure we're getting the right interface with rangelands here. So as Una was saying, they're very diverse enterprises that we find on the rangelands, and she was particularly talking about developing countries. And it's not only livestock systems, it's cropping systems, it's artisanal production of things, it's service industries. Many of these things exist on the rangelands. The relationship between the land users and the enterprises are tremendously varied. We have all kinds of governance systems, all kinds of ownership, And then multiply that across that big map of the rangelands. I saw we've got thousands of different kinds of governance. And many of them have developed over thousands of years around risk reduction, around food self-sufficiency, around cultural identity, and so on. Most of them certainly weren't set up for luxury fibres that are traded in some volatile markets at a tremendous distance from their production point. So what we're really trying to get at here is, how do we get on top of this all, from a landscape point of view, and how do we, bring forward in a sort of communal way, as has been talking about, the solutions to some of these problems around rangelands. And I put it to you that the way to do it is to invest, alongside everything else that's happening, invest directly in rangelands. I have said, probably 1,000 times in my life, information is the key to value. Come on, you producers, just keep on producing information and somebody will pay you for it. I guess I've come to learn that information actually is another word for administration. It's very expensive and time-consuming and, dare I say it, annoying. If we're going to mobilise rangelands, the last thing we need to do is add another layer to everybody's tasks around information. So I'm not going to get into all the details of value addition and transaction risk and all those kinds of things because I think everybody's familiar with that kind of thing. All I'll say is that we have an opportunity here by addressing rangelands to take a different approach to risk. In particular, we should recognise in livestock value chains that the risks faced by some actors in the chain are actually best managed by others in the chain. And that holistic approach to risk management is something that we can really only mobilise if we're getting at the actual ownership of land. Now, why do I mention working capital here? I'm an economist. For those that don't know what an economist is, it's kind of like an accountant, but without the same sense of humour. But when I think about working capital, agricultural finance is 10,000 years old. We've had it as long as we've had agriculture, but it's all geared to crops. Borrow the money, buy your seed, plant the crop, harvest the crop, pay back the money. We've never had agricultural finance systems adapted to livestock in any country that I've worked in. And, when one invests in livestock, there's a capital element. Primarily, it's female. To be paying its way, it's got to be pregnant. All these rules that just sort of tumble onto each other around not, farming techniques, it's just financial reality. So recognising those kinds of things requires a new approach. Now, luxury brands in natural fibres have a narrative, and that narrative is wonderful. I love it. I've always loved it. Let me point something out to you, though. If you hear about cashmere, it's a Scottish narrative. If you hear about fine wool, it's an Italian narrative. Now, that recognises, style. It recognises tremendous expertise and traditions, and custody of that expertise down through the generations, and all of that is wonderful. But, moving ahead with considerations of sustainability and a holistic approach to our production systems, that story needs to include rangelands. And there is a tremendously rich story of provenance and origins that comes from the rangelands. It doesn't necessarily come from the place of processing. So we're looking to mobilise private sector investment in the rangelands. And an inevitable question is, what's in it for the private sector? And UNCCD, and I can never remember that one, so I've put it at the bottom there, the Convention to Combat Desertification, Louise Baker's group, they've laid out a number of these benefits, and they've actually got a quite advanced program called Business for Land, and that's often associated with things like oil extraction or mining and those kinds of things, and getting private ownership of that land and reconstructing it and so on. But as a general rule, they've looked at a whole lot of these things, and I'm not going to stand here and tell large brands about their brand value and about their corporate responsibility. I've already said something about risk mitigation. Everyone can tell there's something to be gained from enhanced productivity if the rangelands are invested in. But let's just say a word on innovation. there are so many technologies and management systems that are available for rangeland management. Everything from silviculture to electric fencing to, you name it. And yet we see so little transfer of that from one system to another. And I've often been in systems where I think, if only this was, fenced in the autumn, we would eliminate a lot of these problems and things. But, that's just anecdotal sort of stuff. We need systematic ways of, at a large scale, investing in those kinds of solutions, and the technologies are already there. I won't say more about those benefits, and I'm happy to answer questions about that as we go. So this project has three components. There's the investment program, which is part one. The commitments to sustainable rangeland restoration, that's the SFA is a partner in that part of the project, and that has a lot to do with Rangeland Stewardship Council. And then we're also putting in place under this project a global monitoring framework. That's a mechanism by which investments can be recognised and identified and advertised, and similarly progress against objectives can be mapped, and product claims can be supported. So just thinking, and very briefly here, and I'm certainly keen to talk more about this as we go, to generate those kinds of benefits in this investment area, the investments are going to be in things like assets of the kind I was mentioning before, management change. There's examples of luxury brands investing heavily in the restoration of endangered species. There are plenty of examples of luxury brands investing in biodiversity and in management change. What we're trying to do is get that into a systematic kind of program and do it at scale, and get firms to work with other firms. It doesn't have to be an individual thing. We're going to move ahead on these kinds of investments, but doing it at scale. Just on this global monitoring framework, I'm just going to briefly say a word on that. At the moment, we're comparing, and we're not going to build this from scratch. We're looking at a number of existing frameworks that are already there, and in particular, this land and soil health assessment package. This is something run by World Agroforestry at the moment, and it's a satellite-based system on a sort of 3-level sampling program for landscapes, and it's satellite photographs of a 100 square metre sample that's composed of one square kilometre plots, and each one of those plots is 1,000 square metres, and those 1,000 square metre plots are backed up by field work and sampling. Now, the kind of indicators that we're looking at are mapped out here, and one can imagine, so many of these are landscape-based, biodiversity-based, those kinds of things. The task is to tie these to livestock value chain performance metrics, and to tie these to investments which are recognisable and will have a payoff in terms of these and other indicators. So that monitoring framework, of course, that sort of data becomes available for people to tune into their own data systems to supplement systems for sustainability, and to provide the consumer with information. So a code could be on a product which would let someone look directly at the asset, like here's a fence that was built, or something even more exciting. So we're starting off with three value chains under Stellar, and these are quite contrasting. So the vicuña one is what I've chosen to call a sort of an island environment. What we have there is sort of isolated and mainly non-contiguous areas of rangeland upon which large numbers of animals, including vicuñas, are dependent, and communities are in turn dependent on all of those animals. And the marketing system is a sort of a function of government in terms of managing the rangelands and managing the marketing of vicuña. Now, there are variants on that. There's also areas of private land where vicuña are run, but we're going to build on that sort of island sort of model. Kashmir's the opposite. That's a large contiguous grazing system in Central Asia where feed rationing, as we would generally understand it, is done by the mobility of herdspeople. And that's already been characterised by some really good progress in terms of end-to-end traceability and recognition of rangeland roles through this Rangeland Stewardship Council. And that is just ripe for investment of another kind. And then lastly, in mohair, and I have some South African colleagues here that we've been discussing this, that's already a highly organised industry, and of these three, it's the value chain that features a lot of privately owned land. But it also has a lot of communally owned land. And in many livestock value chains, as many of you would realise, we actually have livestock that is on private land that is also grazing on public or community-owned land, sometimes by accident and sometimes by design. And to be able to bring together those kinds of institutions for rangeland management is going to be important. And the issue with a highly organised industry like South African mohair is, how to get ahead of the constant concern over access to international markets and compliance with sustainability requirements. So that's largely what I have to say, and if I can just indulge everybody for a minute or two. These are low-level aerial photographs taken of the area where my family farms were in New Zealand in the 1980s. And I don't have to tell you that all of that land erosion and things there is degradation of rangelands. It is due to overgrazing and overstocking and overgrazing. You can see some attempts there to plant what we call exotic forestry. That's Pinus radiata. That is not a native of New Zealand, so we've upset the biodiversity too. Somewhere in amongst all there, driving around, was a 18-year-old, much fitter, much thinner version of myself who put myself through university shearing. It's only now I look back on that and I think, boy, have we done some damage. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. So we'll do a bit of a gear shift now. We've got microphones that the panel can use. I'll take a seat rather than sitting up here. Seeing that last picture from Derek, I think is quite powerful, I think, for many people. I also grew up in similar territory in Australia and in the 90s, and it was images like that from a school bus going through that radicalised me and made me, really keen to work in this space. So, yeah, very powerful image to see. So, yeah, I'll take a seat here. We'll go to Paul, will be our first question. So, Paul, you've been very patient. There, waiting for your turn. Head of International at RSPCA. I see an honorary fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching and a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology. And yet you're still so grounded and such a nice guy. How is that possible? Anyway, to get on to a question on your expertise, I guess, I'm curious to hear why you're here from RSPCA to talk about standards. I mean, why do you think certification schemes and rangeland stewardship aligns with the animal welfare movement more broadly? I guess, is it helpful for animal welfare to be involved in these sorts of things, or would it be better if, we just weren't involved or getting involved at all? I guess what I'm interested in hearing a bit more about is the One Health stuff that Una was talking about earlier.
Okay, thank you, David. And for the non-English speakers here, RSPCA stands for Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which sounds rather bizarre and a bit outdated and a little bit scary sometimes. People thinking, why are we involved in this area of work? Are we talking about cruelty? Obviously, RSPCA is actually 200 years old this year. When it started, that was the driving force, was really about animal cruelty. Now, of course, we call ourselves an animal welfare organisation, so we're really in the business of trying to promote better care of animals in all kinds of environments and settings. Una first approached RSPCA probably very shortly after setting up the Sustainable Fibre Alliance and really trying to get some animal welfare input into that very important component of the standards. And RSPCA has run in the UK for the last 30 years a higher welfare farm assurance and food labelling scheme, which has been quite successful in particular species over the last period. So when we started, it was also a very difficult thing to do. A lot of our supporters, animal welfare supporters, would be thinking and did say, why is an animal protection organisation ostensibly getting involved with animal production, with farmers and livestock producers and so on, so closely? And we went through a period where we had to sort of establish why we would do that and what the benefits were going to be. Ultimately, we're in the business of improving the lives of animals, and at the same time, of course, the people who look after them, their welfare is closely involved with that as well. So the last 30 years, I guess, in the UK, at the moment, we've got more than half of laying hens are reared to RSPCA assured standards, around 28 to 30% of pigs across the UK. That's quite a large number, and more than 90% of salmon. So range of different standards being produced over the period. So our expertise really, and not my expertise, I'm not an animal welfare scientist, is really in that process of setting standards and working with producers and retailers and linking the producer, the animal, ultimately to the end consumer through that process. Establishing a label, building trust in a label, thinking about what non-compliance looks like and how we deal with that. That has been a lesson, I think, for our organisation as any other that runs this kind of scheme, that what we do when things go wrong is really, really important, and having systems in place to do that. So those are the kinds of things that we've been talking about in supporting SFA over the last period. So there are two things I guess I was asked to talk about. One is the multilateral global picture around animal welfare, where that fits. And as we've heard already from Una, mention of One Health, and that is really the theme, if you like, that will chime almost everywhere around the world. One Health is, as we probably well know, is an established UN concept that links the health of people, animals, and the environment. And One Health is now so well embedded that any government, you can knock on the door in any country in the world, and officials know what you're talking about. You don't have to explain yourself. So that does give us a useful hook to start talking about the welfare of animals in their relation to the people who look after them and the land that they occupy. So One Health's really the sort of background. The quadripartite bodies, the three UN bodies, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and UNEP, the Environment Programme, those three UN bodies, plus the World Organization for Animal Health, used to be the OIE, those four together form this really powerful unit for the last 2 years, which implicitly acknowledges that animal welfare has an important part to play in all of these issues. 2 years ago, the UNEA, United Nations Environment Assembly, passed a resolution, which was the first ever UN resolution which had the words animal welfare in the title. And the resolution requires the UNEP to produce a report on the connection between animal welfare, the environment, and sustainable development. So that work is just beginning now, and that report is being put together and will be presented to UNEA at a future meeting, possibly the end of next year, December 2025. That's the hope. But that gives us a background and a context to ensure that animal welfare is at a consideration in all of these discussions. The FAO also last year held for the first time ever its global conference on sustainable livestock transformation. And the theme of that really is not just about food animals, although obviously food animals are very important, but also acknowledging the working animals and other animals that are not necessarily in the food system, but are used for their fiber, for example. So that's a useful sort of global kind of picture, really, that covers animal welfare. The last thing I guess I was asked to talk about was a little bit about the whole process of standard setting and how we go about that in our organization. The fact that it's a cycle as well, and that incorporates animal science and new learning around what species actually need, and that's a constant process. That's something that doesn't stop. We don't just say, okay, now we have the standard, there we are, that's fine. It's a constant cycle of revision across the different species that we cover. And then how that's implemented and audited in a practical way. So what systems do we set up to audit on farm and so on. Now, we don't have goat farming in the UK on any large commercial scale, certainly not cashmere goat farming, but the principles of establishing these kinds of standard schemes and also the marketing side as well, how we've reached consumers, worked with retailers, we hope is useful to these processes as well.
Great, yeah, thanks, Paul. And our final panel member that we've got here, who's been even more patient, I understand in 2023 was presented with an award for innovative sustainability by the Textiles Institute. And after a long career with Alex Begg, is now a sustainability textiles consultant. I understand you're quite passionate about rangelands restoration, and because of this, you have a lot of interest in supporting sustainable fibre production, founding a startup focused on upcycling cashmere waste and all these sorts of things. So I think if you're looking for a good consultant to talk about any of these issues, Ian will be happy to talk to you in the break, I guess. But my question for you, Ian, is around what supply chain got to do with rangelands management? I guess from your experience with supply chain management, certifications, how can sustainable rangeland management practices impact the textile industry? I imagine some of the other panelists may have got the low-hanging fruit on these points, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Sure, thanks. I guess in terms of rangeland management impacting textile supply chain, if I talk about a couple of commercial aspects, first of all, not necessarily because they're the most important, but because I guess they are the ones which will impact directly on companies which are working in fibre supply chains. And the first is just the very existential thing that Derek mentioned. If the rangelands get degraded, then there will be less fibre produced and eventually potentially no fibre produced. 25 years ago, Scotland had a very dynamic electronics sector that is almost entirely disappeared. Rangelands can't be swapped quite so easily as factories can. As you would guess, all those factories are now in China. But rangelands can't be. So for fibre, I think everyone would understand very well that we absolutely depend upon healthy rangelands for a supply of fibre. So that's kind of a very existential baseline one. The other one, I suppose, commercially is about customer demand. And that would come at two levels. One is brands in particular asking for evidence of good rangeland management. And then beyond that, consumers. And consumers, of course, are becoming, at least in some sectors, are becoming increasingly aware of environmental issues and sustainability. And reputation is easily lost in the modern world. So if, this relates a little bit back to the discussion on PEF as well, if natural fibres got a reputation for damaging rangelands, then that could be potentially disastrous, obviously, for natural fibres. So that kind of making sure that commercially there's some commercial insurance against those disasters. But that is dealing with money. I think at a deeper level, I guess I was struggling to find good words for this. It's about being holistic and even spiritually healthy, almost, you would say, in a good... I think everyone's aware that spend decisions have impacts for good or ill, and that's very much a part of the modern world. Just before I left home, there was a big scandal about people being underpaid, being paid €5 an hour in the UK, this year. So we're all aware that these things are live issues, and that spend decisions make a difference. And it's been alluded to already, the low-hanging fruit has been taken, but it's not just about jobs, it's about where people live, it's about traditions, it's about history, and it's about where whole families exist. And the collapse of the cashmere industry in Mongolia would be catastrophic in more ways than just financial. So that kind of being aware of your spending decisions and the impact that has on people, and that being very profound. I think a healthy industry is not just one that's commercially healthy, but that has moral integrity, and where people are aware of the spend, of the impacts for good and for ill of their spending decisions.
Great, yep, thank you. I'm going to go a bit rogue now, Vivian, and ask a question about climate change. Obviously, everyone, it's a really big deal, right? And we often don't talk about it because it's not news, you know. It's not something that's just suddenly come up today, so it's not on the agenda, and so we can easily forget about it. I think when talking about restoration or standards, you're by nature talking about a fixed state. There's something that we've defined or someone's defined that is our ideal that we're aiming for, but obviously the world is changing. So, you know, I'm going to come to you on this one and ask you, like, how does climate change fit within this discussion, and what would good look like from an RSC rangeland stewardship point of view? And then I'll go to any of you from any question now on, if you guys want to jump in and add, feel free to put your hand up and go.
Yeah, thank you. This year in Mongolia, we had this climate disaster, a drought followed by a dzod, we call it. It's really heavy snowed year, so the snow's as heavy as your neck if you stand, and the weather gets slightly warmer. There's water underneath the snow, gets into ice sheet, so livestock couldn't get into the grass underneath. So this year, for example, we had 7 million livestock dying, and the impact of that is for herder communities really catastrophic. It cuts down, you know, for Mongolia, 20% of the cashmere, you know, is down this year, and then 20% last year as well. So all effectively, the available fiber that herders can sell is really down. So it is really, you know, overgrazing and climate change, all of which combined, it's a human environmental disaster, a natural disaster. So ways of addressing this requires not just for one civil society organization. We need to bring local communities, local institutions, the wider kind of institutions that's working into bringing better climate solutions, all need to come, financing, all need to come together and build a better data system in supporting herders for early warning systems, and support need to be there. We can't be shouting every time disaster of this kind of thing strikes, oh, there's this disaster, can you help us? Unless we build, intentional development to support herders and communities in these climate disasters, it's important that we build data and systems to support it going ahead. And as part of Rangeland Stewardship Council, we're looking to support this in a really holistic way. The research to support and why this disaster is happening, what was the impact, and how it affected people this year, and how did that affect people last year. And it supports businesses, and many businesses within the supply chain, as much as it support, kind of herder communities, as a community they're suffering. And as part of the supply chain, many of the, in Biella and around, there's so many processing factories. This is a community. If the fiber, in any way, the risk, it will affect you here too. And I'm not so sure that I think the brand retailer side, they can make their money up with selling plastics or something like that. But however, the communities that supporting this natural fiber is so important here in Mongolia it's really, it's their bottom line is mattered. So we need to ensure that systems, I think the One Health is a most important element when it comes, is that when livestock dies, 7 million of them on the ranges, and if it's decomposting out there, it's not collected and put into burial sites on the ground or something like that, it can spread illnesses, diseases, and wildlife illnesses all across. So the kind of this disaster and how we handle this is happening more and more often. We used to have it once in a decade. It's happening now every few years, and it's a pocket of it happening everywhere for the communities. So I believe that our approach and our collaborating together in building systems is going to be really important. Thank you.
Did you want to add anything? I don't expect you to. If you grab the microphone over there.
Yeah, so climate change and drought are not the same thing, but as Una says, climate change is certainly associated with increasing frequency of drought and other climatic events as well. In livestock value chains, drought is a process rather than an event, and it involves a steadily deteriorating situation and a steadily deteriorating price structure for animals, such that the decision to sell at a loss is imminent, and if someone holds on and the drought continues, then that decision gets repeated at steadily reducing prices. Now contrast that with cropping systems, where drought is associated with higher and higher and higher prices, and crops eventually get harvested and sit in storage somewhere, and they can be sold advantageously. By the way, what can a livestock operator do if they don't sell? Well, they can always go out and buy some of that newly expensive crop that somebody is storing to feed their animals on. So we have a very different context for drought in livestock systems as opposed to in cropping systems. And of course, the livestock systems dominate in the rangelands. Now, we can't do, I might regret saying this, but we can't really do a lot in the short term about climate change. But there's a lot of mitigating drought investments that can be made that can certainly reduce the impact of drought. There's also a lot of technology which can be employed in terms of understanding drought and reacting to it earlier, so one is not quite so trapped into that price decline. So I think there's a lot of arguments for investment in rangelands for improved drought management.
Yeah, I think that's the insidious nature of the impacts of climate change is what makes it such a pickle politically as well. I think so. Lots of useful stuff there. And of course, like I said before, if anyone wants to add a comment or a question from the room or challenge something that they've heard, we're definitely up for that. So I think we've only really got time for one more question, and then I'll ask the room if they have a question as well. But one of the things that we're, I guess, on a bit of a theme of here is the disconnect between what we're talking about here, like these high-end luxury cashmere products, and the people on the ground who are at the start of that value chain and are producing the starting point of that fibre. And we've heard, I guess we heard from Textile Exchange before the break about difficulties in engaging with producers and getting people to participate. And before working at the SFA, I worked for other standard setters, and this is something that certification systems definitely have. So I'd be interested to hear, I'll go to you first, Ian, about what sort of experience or thoughts you might have on the role that local communities and stakeholders living on the rangelands have in terms of participating in these sorts of initiatives, and whether you can give us any good examples of good engagement that you've encountered or seen that people around the room should look to replicate.
Okay. So experience mostly from Mongolia, but I think the first thing I would say is about connection along the supply chain. The grasslands of Mongolia are the place that I've been where it's most easy to feel absolutely alone and feel dwarfed by the landscape. But I think just to be specific about this, I think one of the key things that the SFA brought and that we I appreciate as a manufacturer and a manufacturer working for brands was that the whole supply chain was there. There were herders, there were processors, there were weavers and knitters, there were brands. Everyone was represented, and I think that started to build connection along the supply chain, which is a really important part of being engaged. It's simply, it's back to that kind of common humanity of understanding other people's problems. We've all got our issues wherever we are in the supply chain, but connecting with people, I think, is, so that I would say that first. I think simple incentives, because we all need good reasons to do things. And again, to go back to the Mongolian example, the low-cost loans that were given by Han Bank in Mongolia to herders, which meant that they were not under pressure at the end of a long winter to sell cashmere to the first person who came along, or indeed to borrow money and be in debt and then be under pressure to give a good price on cashmere. So that really made a difference and helped get them engaged. I mean, there's obviously increased prices, those kind of things, but I'm thinking about things other than just simply more money. So those low-cost loans were a good example of an incentive. I think as well, it was interesting, we heard this morning from a New York brand about, and contributing that voice to the discussion. But I think a sense that the supply chain is not just about wealth sets the rules. And I know that's really difficult because commercially that does tend to be true. Those with money, those with influence, those with power will set the rules. But I think genuine partnership and genuine listening is the key to engagement. So that's not necessarily easy to do. It's easy to pretend to do it. It's easy to go and sit in the same room as somebody. But I think genuinely to cooperate, to set aside your priorities for someone else's priorities is not necessarily easy. And the last thing I think I would say that can help engagement is standards. And those simply because they are setting a level playing field. I know that's very British and fair play and all that, but it's true. We all want a level playing field. We all want to be able to compete and to operate on the same terms as everyone else and no unfair advantages. And I think, therefore, as standards get developed and implemented, people know what it means to produce cashmere sustainably. They know what it means to look after animals properly. So it's not about necessarily having all that written down. It's just everyone knows what it is then. I think all of those things, and probably many others that people in the audience would know better than me, but those are kind of top things that I would say.
Great, thanks. And Paul, I might ask you, I mean, you've obviously got a lot of experience in RSPCA with regard to certification, but also from your job title, head of international and all that sort of thing, feel free to talk about engagement, scaling up from sort of, local communities to even the bigger picture, whatever you're comfortable offering.
I think one of the crucial things around engagement is really supporting producers, farmers, herders, whatever the context, to so in between the audits, if you like, to meet the standards and to identify where the challenges are in meeting standards. But having that support system in place to do that is really, really vital. And I don't think that, I think the temptation may be to implement a scheme whereby there are annual audits, let's say, but it's a black and white fail or comply or fail or non-comply question at each point. Whereas what's really needed is a real system of support, especially for communities for whom reaching a standard and maintaining a standard has not been a practice. It's a novelty, if you like, for them to have to do that. So I think for some of the things that SFA have done over the last few years in supporting herding communities in that way, in implementing training, in ensuring that everyone has a chance, if you like, no matter what their individual differences in income and background might be. They're all working to the same playbook, rule book, and they all have a chance to identify what their particular issues are and meet the standard at the next audit. So that support system, I think, is absolutely vital. I'm also kind of curious in a way, because obviously running a food and farming assurance scheme in the UK is quite a different story. It's much easier to identify the source of production with the source, the retail point, if you like. People are much closer geographically to that, culturally to that, and so on, and can imagine that story a lot more easily. So the challenge, I think, for some of these, for natural fibers, is the gap, the geographical and cultural and other gaps between the end user, the end consumer, and the producer. So to shorten that gap, some of the things I think Ian was talking about, really bringing those stories, and Derek mentioned that, and I think that's absolutely spot on. The stories of provenance of these countries where the products are being produced are absolutely, the most important selling point, really. Quality obviously is the most important, but the story is absolutely vital, and that's only going to become more and more important as consumers around the world become more demanding and more sophisticated about, the knowledge they want, the information they want about where things come from and how they were made.
Great. So I think we're wrapping up now, but I'm interested, turn the lights on for the auditorium. I don't know if there's anyone that had a question or a thought that they wanted to add to the conversation. Whilst people think and work up the courage for that, if we could get the next slide up. So talking about engagement, we're going to be a bit opportunistic right now, and in the auditorium, actually ask you to pull out your phones. I see some of you already have managed to do that. And see if you can scan that QR code or head to this link here, where basically we've got a very short consultation on some of the content that's already being discussed and reviewed for the Rangeland Stewardship Council. And if you'd be willing to take the next 5-10 minutes to have a look at those questions and give us your opinions, we'll make sure that is put to good use and makes its way to the table for the discussion. And then I guess you'll be free to head off to get some coffee. But yes, thank you to all of the panelists. Oh, you want to add one more bit as well? Ooh, a bit more excitement.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, David. I'm sorry to interrupt your barcode experience there. Just on Stellar, I'm around the next 2 days and programmed to talk entirely about Stellar to anybody that wants to hear about it. I've also been honoured to be the guest at a number of mills over the last few days, and I have identified people from companies and mills that I would like to target regarding investment in rangelands. So please, let's make that a two-way conversation. Thanks very much.
Okay, just as a quick thank you for filling out the questionnaire, we hope we're going to put your names in a draw if you completed the questionnaire, and there's some gift bags that we'll be giving to you, and we'll announce the winners tomorrow. So hopefully you'll be able to provide your support in completing the questionnaire. Thank you so much.
And win some tasty treats in the meantime. So yes, thank you to our panel, and thank you to the tech staff up the back for indulging us, and thank you everyone for coming. Enjoy your coffee.
No, well done, well done. No, you had, you had time.
We had time.
Yeah, it was. But yeah. I had to go in and out all of the time because there was always something happening, but I managed to see the first part.